The sun crept over the horizon, painting Oakville's Main Street in hues of amber and gold. Mark Henderson trudged out of his front door, coffee mug in hand, to retrieve his morning paper. The same routine, day in and day out, in this sleepy Midwestern town where nothing ever changed. Or so he thought. As Mark bent to pick up the rolled newspaper, a flash of blue caught his eye. He straightened, blinking in disbelief. There, striding down the sidewalk with inhuman grace, was a creature unlike anything he'd ever seen. Her skin glowed a soft, ethereal blue, pulsing gently with each step. But it was her hair that truly captivated, cascading down her back in metallic ripples shimmering like liquid silver in the morning light. She wore a modified postal uniform, the familiar blue and white somehow accentuating her otherworldly appearance. Mark's jaw dropped. The alien? For what else could she be? Noticed his stare and altered course, heading straight for him with a smile that was both familiar and utterly foreign. "Good morning," she chirped, her voice melodious and slightly accented. "I'm Leah, your new mail carrier. It's a pleasure to meet you." She trailed off, clearly waiting for him to supply his name. Mark's brain finally kicked into gear. "Mark," he managed. "Mark Henderson." "Ah, you're Mark." Leah's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. "An extraterrestrial." "Yes, I am. My people signed a cultural exchange agreement with your government. I'm here to foster intergalactic relations and deliver your mail, of course." She reached into her satchel, producing a handful of envelopes. As she handed them over, her fingers brushed against Mark's, and a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them, causing Mark to nearly drop his coffee. "Careful there," Leah said, steadying his arm. Her touch lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary. "We wouldn't want you to burn yourself." Mark swallowed hard. "Right, thanks. So, you're really from another planet?" "Planet?" Leah's eyes sparkled with amusement. They were a deep, swirling violet that seemed to draw him in. "Last time I checked, though I must say, your world is quite lovely, especially the scenery." Her gaze roamed appreciatively over Mark's t-shirt-clad form, and heat crept up Mark's neck. Was she flirting with him? No, that was ridiculous. She was just being friendly. Aliens probably had different social norms, right? "Well, I should continue my route," Leah said, taking a step back. "But I look forward to seeing you again soon, Mark Henderson." She gave him a little wave and continued down the street. Mark watched her go, unable to tear his eyes away from the hypnotic sway of her metallic hair. "What the hell just happened?" he muttered to himself, shaking his head as if to clear it. Throughout the day, Mark found his thoughts drifting back to the alien mail carrier. He tried to focus on his work, proofreading articles for the local newspaper, but every few minutes, an image of Leah's luminous skin or mesmerizing eyes would intrude. At lunch, he walked to his favorite diner, hoping some comfort food would settle his mind. As he pushed open the door, the usual chatter of the lunchtime crowd assaulted his ears. But today, there was a new undercurrent to the conversations. "Did you see her?" "Yes. I heard she's from a planet light years away. My Jimmy says she glows in the dark." Mark slid into his usual booth, unsurprised when Doris, the septuagenarian waitress, bustled over with a knowing grin. "So, Mark," she said, pouring his coffee without being asked, "what do you think of our new resident?" Mark shrugged, aiming for nonchalant. "She seems nice enough. Professional." Doris cackled. "Oh, honey, I may be old, but I'm not blind. Half the men in town are already smitten, and the other half are pretending not to be, you included." "I am not," Mark began to protest, but Doris cut him off with a wave of her order pad. "Save it for someone who'll believe you. Now, you want your usual?" As Mark ate his burger, he couldn't help but overhear the speculation swirling around the diner. Some of it was innocent enough, wondering about Leah's home planet, her customs, her likes and dislikes. But other comments made him bristle. "Bet she's real flexible," a burly construction worker joked to his buddy. "Think she'd be up for some cultural exchange?" Another man said with a leer. Mark's grip tightened on his fork. He wanted to say something to defend Leah, but from what? She wasn't here. And these were just the sort of crude jokes guys always made about attractive women, so why did it bother him so much? The next morning, Mark found himself standing by his mailbox at precisely 10:15 a.m., when Leah had delivered his mail the day before. He told himself he was just being neighborly, welcoming the newcomer to town. It had nothing to do with wanting to see her again, right? On schedule, Leah rounded the corner, her face lit up. Quite literally. Her skin pulsing brighter when she saw him.
"Mark Henderson," she called out. "What a pleasant surprise."
"I hope you're not on any urgent correspondence." Mark chuckled nervously. "No, nothing like that. I just thought I'd say hello, see how you're settling in." Leah beamed at him. "That's very kind of you, I must say. Your species has been most welcoming, although..." She leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice. "Some of your customs still confuse me."
"Oh?"
Mark asked, genuinely curious.
"Like what?"
Leah's brow furrowed adorably. "Well, yesterday I complimented Mrs. Avery on her impressive mammary glands. She seemed quite offended. On my world, that's considered a great honor." Mark choked on air. Yeah, that's not really something we comment on here." "I see," Leah nodded seriously. "And what about physical contact? I've noticed humans seem very particular about it."
As if to demonstrate, she placed a hand on Mark's arm. Her touch was cool, almost electric, sending shivers up his spine.
"Like this," she continued. "On my planet, such casual touches are commonplace between friends, but here I've observed it can have other implications."
Mark's mouth went dry.
"Yen. Yeah, it can, depending on the context."
Leah's violet eyes locked onto his.
"And what context would you say this is, Mark Henderson?"
Before he could formulate a response, a car horn blared. They both jumped, Leah's hand falling away from his arm. Mark's nosy neighbor, Mrs. Kaminsky, was glaring at them from her minivan.
"Everything all right over there?"
she called out, her tone sugary sweet, but her eyes narrowed suspiciously.
"Just fine, Mrs. K," Mark called back, forcing a smile. Leah here was just explaining some of her planet's customs. Mrs. Kaminsky's lips pursed. "I'm sure she was. Don't let me interrupt your cultural exchange." As she drove off, Mark turned back to Leah, mortified. "I'm so sorry about that. Small town, you know.
People can be a bit judgmental." Leah tilted her head, curiosity evident in her expression.
"Judgmental about what? We were merely conversing." Mark ran a hand through his hair, unsure how to explain. "It's complicated. Some people might think, never mind, it's not important." Leah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I have much to learn about human interactions, it seems. Perhaps you could teach me." There was something in her tone, a hint of suggestion, that made Mark's pulse quicken. Sure. I mean, I'm probably not the best teacher, but I could try." Leah's smile widened.
"Excellent. We can start now."
"I believe it's customary to invite new acquaintances for a beverage, is it not? Would you like to join me for a coffee after my route is finished?" Mark blinked, taken aback by her forwardness.
"You mean like today?"
"Again. Unless you have prior engagements," Leah said, her face falling slightly, and Mark found himself rushing to reassure her. No, today's fine. Great, actually. I'd love to." "Wonderful." Leah clapped her hands together, her skin pulsing with apparent excitement. "I'll return at 1700 hours. I mean 5 p.m. Until then, Mark Henderson." As she continued on her route, Mark stood rooted to the spot, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. The rest of the day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Mark tried to distract himself with work, but found himself constantly checking the clock. By 4:30, he was a bundle of nerves, pacing his living room. What if this was a huge mistake? What if they had nothing to talk about? What if he made a fool of himself? A knock at the door jolted him from his spiraling thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Mark opened it to find Leah standing there, somehow even more stunning than before. She had changed out of her postal uniform into a shimmering dress that seemed to ripple with her every movement. "Hello, Mark Henderson," she said, her smile radiant. "Are you ready for our outing?" Mark nodded, not trusting himself to speak, as they walked down the street toward the local coffee shop. He was acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them. Leah, however, seemed oblivious, chattering away about her day. "And then Mr. Johansson asked if I could deliver a package to his wife on Venus." She laughed. "I had to explain that, despite being an extraterrestrial, I'm not actually familiar with every planet in the galaxy." "Ok." Mark chuckled, some of his tension easing. "Yeah, Earl's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he means well." They reached the coffee shop, a cozy little place called The Daily Grind. As they entered, conversation ground to a halt. Every eye in the place turned to them. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. "So, what would you like to drink?"
Leah studied the menu board intently.
"I'm not familiar with most of these beverages. What would you recommend?" "How about a latte?" Mark suggested. "It's coffee with steamed milk. Nice and smooth." "That sounds lovely," Leah nodded. "I'll have one of those, please."
As Mark placed their order, he could hear the whispers starting up again behind him.
He gritted his teeth, determined not to let it ruin their time. Was this a date? He wasn't even sure. They found a table in the corner, somewhat sheltered from the prying eyes of the other patrons. As they sat, Leah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "So, Mark Henderson," she began, "tell me about yourself. What do you do when you're not collecting mail from attractive alien visitors?"
Quote. Mark nearly choked on his coffee.
I work for the local paper. Nothing too exciting. Just copy editing, mostly." Leah's eyes widened. "But that sounds fascinating. You must know all the local news before anyone else."
"Tell me, what's the most intriguing story you've worked on recently?"
As Mark launched into a tale about the great Oakville Cheese Fest debacle of last year, he found himself relaxing. Leah was an attentive listener, asking insightful questions and laughing at all the right moments. Before he knew it, an hour had passed.
"Oh my," Leah said, glancing at the ornate watch on her wrist.
"I've taken up so much of your time. I hope I haven't been a bother."
"No,
not at all,"
Mark assured her quickly.
"This has been really nice, actually." Leah beamed at him, her skin pulsing with a warm glow. "I'm so glad you think so. I've greatly enjoyed our time together." As they stood to leave, Leah suddenly swayed on her feet. Mark reached out to steady her, his hand on her waist.
"Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice.
Leah blinked rapidly, her usually bright eyes slightly unfocused.
"I'm not sure. I feel rather strange. Perhaps your earth beverages don't agree with my physiology." Marriage. Mark cursed himself for not considering that possibility.
"I'm so sorry. I should have thought of that. Here, let me walk you home." Quote dot.
As they made their way down the darkening street, Leah leaned heavily against Mark. He could feel the coolness of her skin through her dress and a faint humming sensation that seemed to emanate from her very being.
"Mark," she murmured, her voice slightly slurred. "You're so very kind and quite aesthetically pleasing for a human." Mark felt his face heat up. Thanks. You're pretty aesthetically pleasing yourself." Leah giggled, the sound like tinkling bells. "Oh, I know, but it's nice to hear you say it."
They reached the small apartment building where Leah was staying. As they climbed the steps, she turned to face him, swaying slightly.
"I had a wonderful time tonight, Mark Henderson," she said, her violet eyes boring into his. "Perhaps we could do this again sometime?" Before Mark could respond, Leah leaned in and pressed her lips to his cheek. It wasn't quite a kiss, more like a buzz of electricity against his skin, but it left him stunned nonetheless. "Good night," Leah whispered, disappearing into her apartment. Mark stood there for a long moment, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been. Finally, he turned and began the walk home, his mind reeling. What had he gotten himself into? Over the next few weeks, Mark found himself looking forward to Leah's daily visits with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified him. Their interactions grew longer, more familiar, charged with an energy he couldn't quite define. One particularly sunny morning, Mark was watering his front lawn when Leah appeared, her metallic hair glinting in the sunlight. "Good morning, Mark Henderson," she called out cheerfully. "My, don't you look refreshing today?" Mark glanced down at his old t-shirt, now damp with sweat and clinging to his chest. He felt a blush creeping up his neck. Thanks," he mumbled. "Just doing some yard work." Leah tilted her head, studying him with those mesmerizing violet eyes. "Fascinating! On my world, we have automated systems for such tasks. But there's something very primal about watching a human engage in physical labor." The way she said primal sent a shiver down Mark's spine. He cleared his throat, desperate to change the subject. "So, how's the route going today?" Leah's face lit up, quite literally, her skin pulsing brighter. "Oh, wonderfully. I had the most interesting conversation with Mrs. Avery about her feline companion. Did you know Earth cats don't have tentacles? How do they grasp their prey? Mark couldn't help but laugh. They use their claws and teeth mostly. No tentacles required. Extraordinary! Leah exclaimed. She took a step closer, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Humans are so different from my people in so many ways. For instance, your epidermis doesn't appear to be bioluminescent. How do you attract mates? Mark nearly dropped the hose he was holding. What? Leah gestured to her own glowing skin. On my world, the brightness of one's bioluminescence is a key factor in attracting a potential mate. The brighter the glow, the more desirable the individual. But humans seem to rely on other factors. What are they? Fur. Mark's mind raced. How had they gone from small talk about cats to discussing human mating habits? It's, complicated, he stammered. There are lots of factors. Personality, shared interests, physical attraction. Leah nodded seriously. I see. And what traits do you personally find attractive, Mark Henderson? The directness of her question caught him off guard. I guess I like someone who's intelligent, funny, kind, and physically. Leah pressed, taking another step closer. She was now mere inches away. Close enough that Mark could feel the subtle hum of energy emanating from her skin. Mark swallowed hard. That is. He was saved from his fumbling response by the sound of a car horn. Mrs. Kaminsky was driving by, her eyes narrowing suspiciously at the scene before her. Leah stepped back. Mark exhaled, a mix of relief and disappointment washing over him as Leah stepped back. Mrs. Kaminsky's car disappeared around the corner, but the moment had been effectively shattered. Leah's brow furrowed slightly. I've made you uncomfortable. I apologize, Mark Henderson. It seems I still have much to learn about human social norms. No, Mark rushed to reassure her. You didn't. It's fine. He trailed off, unsure how to explain the complicated tangle of emotions she stirred in him. Leah studied his face intently, her violet eyes searching. Perhaps, she said slowly, we could continue this discussion another time, in a more private setting. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Yeah, sure. That would be nice. Leah's face lit up, her skin pulsing with a warm glow. Excellent! I shall return this evening after my duties are complete. Until then, Mark Henderson. As she continued on her route, Mark watched her go, his mind reeling. What had he just agreed to? And why did the prospect excite and terrify him? Throughout the day, Mark found himself increasingly distracted. He botched 3 articles at work, earning a stern talking to from his editor. By the time he returned home, his nerves were frayed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across his front yard, Mark paced anxiously. What if this was a mistake? What if they had nothing to talk about? What if he made a fool of himself? A soft knock at the door made him jump. Taking a deep breath, Mark opened it to find Leah standing there, her metallic hair shimmering in the fading light. Good evening, Mark Henderson, she said, her voice melodious. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. ... Mark shook his head, stepping aside to let her in. No, not at all. Come in, please. As Leah entered, Mark couldn't help but notice how her luminescent skin seemed to glow even brighter in the dim light of his living room. She looked around curiously, taking in the modest furnishings. Your dwelling is most interesting, she commented. So many flat surfaces. How do you climb the walls? Puss. Mark blinked, caught off guard. We don't. Humans don't really climb walls. Puss. Leah's eyes widened. Fascinating. On my world, vertical surfaces are essential for rest and relaxation. How do you sleep in beds? Mark explained, gesturing toward his bedroom. Flat horizontal surfaces. Leah followed his gaze, her curiosity evident. May I see? Before Mark could respond, she was already moving toward the bedroom. He followed, a mixture of nervousness and excitement churning in his stomach. Leah examined the bed with great interest, running her hand over the comforter. So soft, she murmured. And you simply lie here horizontally? Mark nodded, acutely aware of how close they were standing. Yeah, that's pretty much it. ... Leah turned to face him, her violet eyes intense. Mark Henderson, There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Mark's throat went dry. Oh? I've noticed that my presence seems to cause physiological changes in you, Leah said matter-of-factly. Increasing heart rate, dilated pupils, flushed skin. Are these signs of attraction in humans? Mark felt his face heat up, confirming her observations. Yes, they can be. Leah took a step closer, her skin pulsing with a soft, inviting glow. And do you find me attractive, Mark Henderson? Quote. The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Mark opened his mouth to respond. But before he could form words, a strange sound filled the room. It was like a high-pitched humming emanating from Leah herself. Her eyes widened in surprise, then embarrassment. Oh no, she muttered. Not now. What's happening? Mark asked, concerned. Are you okay? Leah stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to contain the sound. I'm fine. It's just... Oh, this is terribly embarrassing. It seems my reproductive cycle is beginning earlier than anticipated. Mark's eyebrows shot up. You're what now? My species undergoes a periodic mating season, Leah explained hurriedly, her skin now pulsing rapidly with light. It's a natural biological process, but it can be intense. I should go. I'm so sorry, Mark Henderson. This isn't how I wanted our evening to progress. Before Mark could process what was happening, Leah had rushed out of the bedroom and toward the front door. He followed, still trying to wrap his head around this new development. Wait, he called out as she reached for the doorknob. Are you sure you're okay? Do you need help? Leah paused, looking back at him with a mixture of longing and regret. You're very kind, Mark Henderson, but trust me, you don't want to be around me for the next few days. It's complicated. With that, she was gone, practically sprinting down the street. Mark watched her go, his heart pounding and his mind reeling. What the hell was he supposed to do now? Over the next few days, Mark found himself in a constant state of agitation. He'd catch glimpses of Leah on her route, her skin glowing brighter than ever, drawing stares and whispers from everyone she passed. More than once, he saw her pause, her whole body trembling, before she'd shake herself and continue on. The entire town seemed to be aflame with gossip and speculation. At the diner, Mark overheard snatches of conversation that made his blood boil. I heard she's in heat like a cat, one woman whispered. My boy says he can't concentrate in school with her around, another added. Says it's like she's broadcasting some kind of alien signals. Mark gritted his teeth, fighting the urge to defend Leah. But what could he say? He barely understood what was happening himself. On the third day, unable to take it anymore, Mark decided to do some research. He spent hours hunched over his computer, searching for any information on alien biology and mating practices. Most of what he found was pure speculation or badly disguised erotica. But a few scientific papers caught his eye. According to one study, some alien species experienced periodic surges in pheromone production similar to the estrous cycles of Earth animals. These pheromones could have powerful effects on both members of their own species and, in some cases, other compatible life forms. Mark's mind raced. Was that what was happening to Leah? Were her pheromones affecting him, explaining the intense attraction he felt? Or were his feelings genuine? A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. He opened it to find his best friend, Tom, standing there with a six-pack of beer. All right, buddy, Tom said, pushing past him into the house. Time for an intervention. You've been moping around for days, and the whole town's talking. What's going on with you and the hot alien chick? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's complicated, man. Tom snorted, cracking open a beer. Isn't it always? Come on, spill. You hooking up with her or what? No, Mark protested, perhaps too quickly. It's not like that. She's just going through something. Some kind of alien biology thing. Tom's eyebrows shot up. Biology thing? You mean like alien PMS? Mark groaned. It's more complicated than that. She called it a mating drive, said it heightens her emotions and desires. A slow grin spread across Tom's face. Dude, are you telling me your sexy alien lady is in heat and she's got the hots for you? It's not funny, man, Mark snapped. She's suffering, and the way people are talking about her, it's not right.
Tom's grin faded, replaced by a look of concern.
Hey, I'm sorry. You're right. It's not cool to make fun. But seriously, Mark, what are you going to do? You can't just ignore this. Mark slumped onto the couch, accepting the beer Tom offered.
I don't know. She told me to keep my distance, but I can't stop thinking about her. Tom was quiet for a moment, sipping his beer thoughtfully. Different. Look, man, he finally said. I can't pretend to understand alien biology or whatever, but I know you, and I haven't seen you this worked up over a girl, alien or otherwise, in years. Maybe you need to talk to her. Really talk. Figure out what's going on between you two.
Mark nodded slowly.
Yeah, maybe you're right. But how? She's avoiding me, and I don't want to make things worse.
A mischievous glint appeared in Tom's eye. Well, it just so happens that the town's hosting that big summer festival tomorrow night. Everyone will be there, including our resident extraterrestrial. I bet it could be your chance to corner her, have a real conversation. As Tom left later that evening, his words echoed in Mark's mind. The summer festival. It was risky, but it might be his only chance to clear the air with Leah. Decision made, he fell into a fitful sleep, his dreams filled with glowing blue skin and haunting violet eyes. The next evening, the town square was alive with lights, music, and the excited chatter of what seemed like the entire population of Oakville. Mark wove through the crowd, his eyes scanning for any sign of Leah's distinctive blue glow. He was about to give up hope when he spotted her standing alone at the edge of the festivities, her skin pulsing with a soft, mesmerizing light, drawing stares from everyone who passed. But it was the look on her face that caught Mark's attention, a mixture of longing and isolation that tugged at his heart. Taking a deep breath, he approached her. "Leah," he called out softly. She turned, her eyes widening as she saw him. "Mark Henderson," she breathed, that strange resonance back in her voice. "You shouldn't be here. I told you to keep your distance." "I know," Mark said, stepping closer despite her warning. "But we need to talk. Please, Leah, just give me 5 minutes." Leah hesitated, her skin flashing with rapid pulses of light. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, but not here. Too many eyes." She led him away from the crowd toward a small gazebo nestled in a thicket of trees. As they walked, Mark could feel the eyes of the townspeople on them, could hear the whispers starting up. He ignored them, focusing on Leah's retreating form. Once they were relatively alone, Leah turned to face him in the dim light, her luminescence even more pronounced, casting everything in a soft blue glow. "What do you want from me, Mark Henderson?" she asked, her voice strained. Mark took a deep breath. "I want to understand what's happening to you, to us, this connection between us. Is it real, or is it just your pheromones or whatever affecting me?" Leah's eyes widened in surprise. "You've been researching my biology?" Mark nodded, feeling a blush creep up his neck. "I needed to understand, but everything I found was so clinical. It didn't explain how I feel when I'm around you." A look of pain crossed Leah's face. "Oh, Mark," she sighed. "It's not that simple. Yes, my body is producing powerful pheromones right now. They're designed to attract potential mates, but they don't create feelings out of nothing. They merely intensify what's already there." Mark's heart skipped a beat. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying that whatever is between us, it's not just biology," Leah said softly. "At least not on my end." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Mark took a step closer, drawn by an irresistible force. "Leah, But before he could finish, a commotion erupted from the direction of the festival. Shouts and screams pierced the night air, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Leah's head whipped around, her eyes wide with alarm. "Oh no," she whispered. "It's happening again." "What's happening?" Mark asked, but Leah was already running back toward the square. He followed, his heart pounding with a mixture of confusion and dread as they burst back into the crowded area. Chaos reigned. People were shouting and shoving, their faces flushed and eyes wild. In the center of it all stood Mrs. Kaminsky, wielding a broken bottle and screaming incoherently about alien mind control. "It's my pheromones," Leah explained hurriedly, her voice tight with guilt. "They're affecting everyone, lowering inhibitions, heightening emotions. I never should have come here tonight." Mark watched in horror as normally mild-mannered townspeople turned on each other. Years of petty grievances exploding into physical confrontations.
Even Tom, usually the voice of reason, was red-faced and shouting at the chief of police. "We have to do something," Mark said, grabbing Leah's arm without thinking.
The moment he touched her, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. "Mark," she whimpered, her voice thick with need. "Please, you have to let go. I can't control myself when you touch me."
But Mark found he couldn't release her. The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, the chaos around them fading into background noise. He could feel Leah trembling beneath his hand, could see the conflict raging in her violet eyes.
"Leah," he breathed, leaning in closer. "I don't want to control myself anymore." Oh. Their lips met in a kiss that was like nothing Mark had ever experienced. It was as if every nerve in his body was on fire, electricity coursing through him. Leah's skin pulsed with light, bathing them both in an ethereal glow. For a moment, everything else ceased to exist.
There was only Leah, only this connection between them that defied explanation. But reality came crashing back as a bottle shattered near their feet. They broke apart, both gasping for air, to find the riot had only intensified.
"Oh God," Leah moaned, her eyes wide with horror. "What have I done?" Before Mark could respond, she wrenched herself from his grasp and took off running, disappearing into the night. He called after her, but his voice was lost in the cacophony of the rioting crowd. As sirens wailed in the distance and the shouting grew louder, Mark stood alone in the chaos, his lips still tingling from Leah's kiss. Whatever happened next, he knew nothing would ever be the same. The Summer Festival riot, as it came to be known, marked a turning point for Oakville. In the days that followed, the town was abuzz with rumors and recriminations. Windows were boarded up, friendships were strained, and an undercurrent of tension ran through every interaction. Mark found himself at the center of it all, fielding suspicious glares and probing questions from his neighbors. The fact that he'd been seen with Leah just before the riot broke out had not gone unnoticed.
"I'm telling you, that alien girl's got some kind of mind control powers," Mrs. Kaminsky insisted over coffee at the diner.
"How else do you explain what happened? One minute we're all having a nice time. The next, it's like something out of a war zone." Mark bit his tongue, fighting the urge to defend Leah. How could he explain what had really happened without revealing her private biological processes? And more importantly, where was she now? Quote,
"In the week since the riot, there had been no sign of Leah. A stern-faced man in a crisp suit had taken over her mail route, refusing to answer any questions about her whereabouts. Mark's letters to her went unanswered, and his attempts to find her apartment were met with dead ends. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions and the lingering memory of that electric kiss. As the days stretched into weeks, Mark found himself growing increasingly restless. He couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leah's face, heard the pain in her voice as she'd run away from him.
"You've got to snap out of it, man," Tom urged him one evening over beers. "I know you had a thing for her, but she's gone, and frankly, after what happened at the festival, maybe that's for the best." Mark slammed his bottle down harder than he'd intended. "You don't understand," he growled. "It wasn't her fault. She was going through something, and I think I made it worse." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Made it worse? How?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I kissed her," he admitted, "right in the middle of everything. It was like a bomb went off. I think that's what really set everyone off." Tom let out a low whistle. "Damn, dude. Alien makeout session in the middle of a riot? That's hardcore." "It's not funny," Mark snapped. "I think I really hurt her, and now she's just gone. I need to find her. I need to make this right." His friend studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, if it means that much to you, I'll help. But where do we even start?" Quote, it was a question that plagued Mark for days. He scoured news reports, searched online forums, even considered reaching out to UFO enthusiast groups. But every lead turned into a dead end, until 3 weeks after the riot, a package arrived on his doorstep. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Mark's heart raced as he tore it open, revealing a strange pulsing orb about the size of a baseball. It glowed with the same soft blue light as Leah's skin. Attached was a note written in an elegant, flowing script. "Mark Henderson,
I'm sorry for leaving without explanation. What happened at the festival was my fault.
I let my emotions, my biology, overpower my better judgment. I put you and your entire town at risk. I've been recalled to my homeworld for evaluation. My superiors are displeased with how I handled the situation. I don't know when or if I'll be allowed to return to Earth, but I couldn't leave without giving you some explanation. The orb enclosed is a communication device. If you activate it, we can speak one last time, but be warned. Once used, it will burn out. We will have only a few minutes. I understand if you choose not to use it. What I've put you through is unforgivable, but know that despite everything, my feelings for you were real. Perhaps the only real thing in this mess. Goodbye, Mark Henderson. I'm sorry for everything. Leah. Mark stared at the letter, then at the glowing orb, his mind racing. This was his chance. Perhaps his only chance. To get answers. To see Leah one last time. But as his hand hovered over the orb, doubt crept in. What if this was a mistake? What if hearing Leah's voice again only made things worse again? And yet, the pull of unanswered questions was too strong to resist. Taking a deep breath, Mark pressed his palm against the cool surface of the orb. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, it began to glow brighter, pulsing with an inner light that seemed to match the beating of his heart. Suddenly, the air in front of him shimmered, and a holographic image of Leah appeared. She looked different. Her skin's glow was muted, and her eyes held a sadness that made Mark's chest ache. "Mark Henderson," she said, her voice carrying that strange melodious resonance he remembered. "You activated the orb. I wasn't sure you would." Mary. Mark swallowed hard, fighting the urge to reach out and touch the image. "Leah," he breathed. "Where are you? Are you okay? Or Ficken?" A small, sad smile played at her lips. "I'm back on my home world, and I'm facing the consequences of my actions." "Consequences?" Mark frowned. "But it wasn't your fault. You couldn't control what happened." Leah shook her head. "That's precisely the problem, Mark. I should have been able to control it. My people have protocols in place for situations like this. I was supposed to isolate myself to avoid contact with other species during my cycle. But I couldn't stay away from you." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Mark's heart raced. "Leah, She interrupted, her image flickering slightly. "We don't have much time. There's something you need to know." Mark nodded, bracing himself. "What is it?" "The connection between us," Leah continued, her voice strained. "It's not just attraction, or even just my pheromones, my people. We have the ability to form deep, psychic bonds with compatible individuals. It's rare, especially with other species, but when it happens..." She trailed off, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that took his breath away. "Are you saying we're bonded?" Mark asked, his mind reeling. Leah nodded. "It's why you felt so drawn to me. Why my emotional state affected you so strongly, and it's why I couldn't stay away even when I knew I should." Mark's head spun with the implications. A psychic bond? It sounded like something out of a sci-fi novel, and yet it explained so much. "What does this mean for us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah's image flickered again, more pronounced this time. "I don't know," she admitted. "This kind of interspecies bonding is unprecedented. My superiors are concerned. They want to study it to understand the implications." A chill ran down Mark's spine. "Study it? What does that mean?" Before Leah could answer, a commotion could be heard in the background of her transmission. She looked over her shoulder, her expression turning to one of alarm. "I have to go," she said hurriedly. "Mark, listen to me. Whatever happens, don't try to find me. It's not safe. Just know that what I feel for you is real, bond or no bond. Her image flickered violently, then disappeared altogether. The orb in Mark's hand grew hot, then crumbled to ash, leaving him alone in the sudden silence of his living room. Mark stood there, his mind whirling with everything he'd learned. A psychic bond, unprecedented, not safe. The words echoed in his head, mingling with the memory of Leah's frightened expression in those final moments. One thing was clear. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than just the two of them. And despite Leah's warning, Mark knew he couldn't just let it go. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone and dialed Tom's number. Hey man, he said when his friend answered. Remember how you said you'd help me find Leah? Well, things just got a whole lot more complicated. I need your help. As he filled Tom in on what had happened, Mark's resolve solidified. He didn't know how, but he was going to find Leah.
He was going to uncover the truth about this bond between them, and no matter what it took, he was going to bring her home. The orb's ash was still warm in his palm, as Mark realized that his quiet life in Oakville was truly over. Whatever came next would change everything, not just for him and Leah, but perhaps for the entire relationship between Earth and her intergalactic neighbors. As the sun set on Act 2, casting long shadows across Mark's determined face, the stage was set for an adventure that would take him far beyond the boundaries of his small Midwestern town, into the vast and dangerous unknown of interstellar politics and alien biology. The bond between him and Leah pulsed like a living thing, a beacon drawing him toward a future he could scarcely imagine. Whatever the risks, whatever the consequences, Mark knew one thing for certain. He would not rest until he understood the truth of their connection and brought Leah safely back to Earth. With a deep breath, he stepped out into the gathering darkness, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next chapter of their story was about to begin, and Mark Henderson, small-town newspaper editor turned reluctant interstellar adventurer, was determined to see it through to the end. The harsh fluorescent lights of the underground bunker cast an eerie glow on Mark's face as he paced back and forth. 3 months had passed since his last communication with Leah. 3 months of clandestine meetings, whispered conspiracies, and narrow escapes. Now, standing in a secret government facility miles beneath the Kansas prairie, he was closer than ever to finding her. "You sure about this, man?" Tom asked, his usual joviality replaced by nervous tension. "Once we go through that door, there's no turning back." Mark paused, his hand hovering over the biometric scanner, the weight of everything he'd been through. The chaos in Oakville, the midnight rendezvous with shadowy figures claiming to be part of an interstellar resistance, the harrowing journey across state lines in the back of a modified mail truck. It all came crashing down on him. "I have to know," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Whatever's happening between Leah and me, it's bigger than just us. I need answers." "Cut this." Tom nodded grimly. "All right then, let's go get your alien girlfriend." Mark pressed his palm to the scanner, wincing as it pricked his skin for a DNA sample. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a pneumatic hiss, the massive steel door slid open. The sight that greeted them stole the breath from Mark's lungs. The cavernous room beyond was filled with row upon row of glowing pods, each containing a familiar blue-skinned figure. "My God," Tom whispered. "There must be hundreds of them." Mark's eyes darted frantically from pod to pod, searching for Leah's familiar face. "They're all in some kind of stasis," he muttered. "But why? What are they doing with them?" Before Tom could respond, an alarm blared to life, red lights flashing and bathing the room in an ominous glow. "Intruder alert," a robotic voice announced. "Security protocols engaged." "Shh," Tom hissed. "We need to find Leah and get out of here fast." Mark nodded, forcing himself to focus. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, trying to feel for that familiar pulse of energy that had haunted his dreams for months. There, a flicker of awareness, a surge of recognition. His eyes snapped open. "This way," he said, taking off at a run. They wove through the maze of pods, the alarm growing louder with each passing second. Finally, they skidded to a stop in front of a pod near the back of the room. Inside, her face serene in artificial sleep, was Leah. "Stand back," Tom warned, pulling out a device they'd acquired from their resistance contacts. He pressed it against the pod's control panel, and with a burst of energy, the glass began to retract. As the stasis field dissipated, Leah's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, confusion clouded her violet gaze. Then her eyes locked onto Mark's, and a surge of emotion, relief, joy, fear, coursed through their bond. "Mark Henderson," she breathed, her voice weak from disuse. "You came for me." Mark reached out, helping her unsteady form from the pod. "Of course I did," he said, fighting the urge to pull her close. "I couldn't just leave you here." "Oh." A ghost of a smile played at Leah's lips. "Your talk. You never could follow instructions, could you?" Their moment of reunion was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. Patience Cutches. "Hey, hate to break up the reunion, but we've got company coming," Tom said. Mark nodded, supporting Leah as they made their way toward the exit. But as they reached the door, a squad of heavily armed guards burst through, weapons trained on them. "Freeze!" the lead guard shouted. "Step away from the alien!" Mark's mind raced, searching for a way out. But before he could act, Leah stepped forward, her skin beginning to pulse with that familiar mesmerizing glow. "Wait," she said, her voice carrying that strange resonance that had first captivated Mark all those months ago. "You don't want to hurt us. We're not your enemies." The guard's eyes glazed over, their weapons lowering slightly. Mark realized with a start that Leah was using her pheromones, her alien biology, to influence them. "That's right," she continued, her voice soothing. "You want to let us go? It's for the best, really." For a moment, it seemed to be working. The guard stepped aside, creating a path to freedom. But just as hope began to bloom in Mark's chest, a new figure appeared in the doorway. "I'm afraid that won't work on me, Leah," a stern voice announced. A tall, imposing woman in a crisp suit strode into the room, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. "Your pheromones are impressive, but hardly infallible." Quote. Leah's shoulders slumped, the glow fading from her skin. "Director Chen," she said wearily, "I should have known you'd be behind this." The woman, Director Chen, smiled coldly. "Did you really think we'd let an asset like you simply disappear, especially after that incident in Oakville?" Mark stepped forward, placing himself between Leah and the director. "What's going on here, Orc? Why are you holding her? Holding all of them prisoner?" Chen's gaze shifted to Mark, her expression unreadable behind those dark lenses. "Mr. Henderson, the man who started all this trouble. I must admit, I'm impressed by your tenacity. Not many humans would go to such lengths for an alien." "Answer the question," Mark growled, his patience wearing thin. Chen sighed, as if explaining to a particularly slow child. "It's quite simple, really. Leah and her kind represent an unprecedented opportunity for study. Their biology, their psychic abilities, the potential applications are endless. We couldn't risk losing them." "We're not lab rats," Leah spat, her usual composure cracking. "We came here in peace to foster understanding between our worlds. This is a violation of every agreement we made." Quote. "Agreements change," Chen said dismissively. "Priorities shift. And right now, our priority is unlocking the secrets of your species, starting with that fascinating bond you formed with Mr. Henderson here." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered Leah's warning all those months ago. It's not safe. Now he understood why. "You can't do this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We won't let you." Chen's smile widened, predatory. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, who said you had a choice?" She raised her hand, and the guards snapped back to attention, weapons once again trained on the group. "Now then," Chen continued, "shall we discuss this like civilized beings? Now, I have some questions about your connection, and I'm very interested in hearing your answers." Mark's mind raced, searching for a way out. But as he looked at Leah, saw the fear and resignation in her eyes, he realized there was only one path forward now. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. "We'll answer your questions, but on one condition." Chen raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, Mr. Henderson." "Maybe not," Mark conceded, "but I think you'll want to hear this, because I'm offering you something you can't get any other way." "And what might that be?" Mark took a deep breath, feeling Leah's surprise and concern pulse through their bond. "A willing subject, ma'am. I'll submit to whatever test you want, tell you everything I know about this bond, but only if you let Leah and the others go." Quote. A tense silence fell over the room. Chen studied Mark intently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "An intriguing offer, Mr. Henderson, but what makes you think your cooperation is worth more than what we could learn from Leah and her kind?" Quote. Mark met her gaze steadily. "Because I'm the only human who's formed this kind of bond. I'm the missing piece of the puzzle, and I'm guessing you'd rather have a volunteer than a reluctant prisoner." Chen considered this for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, she laughed.
Well played, Mr. Henderson. Very well, I accept your terms, with one small addition. She turned to Leah. You're free to go, all of you. But I want you to stay on Earth to continue your cultural exchange program. After all, we wouldn't want to arouse suspicion, would we? Leah's eyes narrowed. And if we refuse? Chen shrugged. Then Mr. Henderson's noble sacrifice will have been for nothing. The choice is yours. Mark could feel the conflict raging within Leah through their bond. Finally, she nodded. We accept. Excellent, Chen said, clapping her hands together. Guards, escort Miss Leah and Mr. Henderson's friend to the surface. See that the other guests are awakened and briefed on the situation. As Tom and Leah were led away, Mark felt a surge of emotion through the bond. Gratitude, fear, and something deeper. Something he couldn't quite name. Be careful, Leah's voice whispered in his mind. And know that I... But before she could finish, the connection was severed as the door slammed shut behind her. Chen turned to Mark, her smile now genuinely intrigued. Well then, Mr. Henderson, shall we begin? The next few weeks were a blur of tests, interviews, and invasive procedures. Mark found himself poked, prodded, and questioned about every aspect of his connection with Leah. Through it all, he clung to the hope that she and the others were safe, that his sacrifice had been worth it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chen called him into her office. Well, Mr. Henderson, she said, gesturing for him to sit. I must say you've been most cooperative, and the data we've gathered is fascinating. Mark leaned forward, his heart racing. Does that mean we're done? Can I go now? Chen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Not quite yet. There's one final test we'd like to conduct. A test of the strength and nature of your bond with Leah. She pressed a button on her desk, and a screen flickered to life on the wall. Mark's breath caught in his throat as Leah's face appeared. What is this? He demanded, rising to his feet. You said you'd let her go. And we did, Chen said calmly. But as I mentioned, she agreed to stay on Earth to continue her work. What you're seeing is a live feed from Oakville. What? Mark watched in growing horror as the scene unfolded. Leah was back on her mail route, delivering letters with that same grace and charm that had first captivated him. But something was different. She was smiling, laughing, flirting with a man Mark recognized as the new high school science teacher. What are you trying to prove? Mark growled, tearing his eyes away from the screen. Chen leaned back in her chair, studying him intently. We're curious about the nature of your bond, Zaf. Is it truly as deep and unbreakable as you claim? Or is it simply a product of Leah's biology, her mating cycle? Mark's fist clenched at his sides. You're manipulating her kephis. Perhaps, Chen conceded. Or perhaps we're simply allowing nature to take its course. Leah's current cycle is ending. Without the influence of her pheromones, without your physical presence, we're interested to see how the bond holds up. Mark closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, trying to feel that familiar pulse of connection. But there was nothing, just a hollow emptiness where Leah's presence had once been. This proves nothing, he said finally, his voice hoarse. Whatever happens, whatever she does, it doesn't change how I feel. Chen's eyebrows rose. And how is that, Mr. Henderson? Mark met her gaze steadily. I love her. Bond or no bond, pheromones or not, and nothing you do can change that. For a long moment, Chen simply stared at him. Then, to Mark's surprise, she smiled. A genuine smile this time. Congratulations, Mr. Henderson, she said, standing. You've passed the final test. Before Mark could process what was happening, the door burst open. Leah rushed in, her skin glowing with that familiar mesmerizing light. Mark, she cried, throwing herself into his arms. Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. They said if I played along, they'd let you go. Mark held her tight, his mind reeling. I don't understand, he murmured into her hair. What's going on? Chen cleared her throat. Allow me to explain everything you've experienced over the past few weeks. The tests, the separation, even that video feed. It was all part of a carefully orchestrated experiment. We needed to understand the true nature of your bond, free from external influences. Leah pulled back slightly, her violet eyes searching Mark's face.
They wanted to see if our connection would hold even when my biology wasn't influencing things? Mark's head spun. So all of this, it was just a test? A necessary one, Chen said, her tone softening slightly. The implications of a successful human-alien bonding are immense. We needed to be sure. And are you? Mark asked, his arm still wrapped protectively around Leah. Are you sure now? Chen nodded. We are. Your bond is real, Mr. Henderson. Unprecedented, yes, but very real and very powerful. Leah's skin pulsed with joy, her emotions flooding through their newly reawakened bond. Do you know what this means, Mark? We can be together, truly together. Mark's heart soared, but a nagging doubt still lingered. What about the others? He asked, turning to Chen. The aliens in stasis? The tests? The secrecy? Chen sighed. A regrettable necessity. We needed to understand the full scope of Leah's species' abilities before we could safely proceed with further cultural exchange. But now, thanks to you both, we have that understanding. She pressed another button on her desk, and the wall of her office slid away, revealing a stunning view of Earth from orbit. Mark gasped, realizing for the first time that they weren't underground at all. They were on a space station. Welcome, Chen said, a hint of pride in her voice, to the future of human-alien relations. As Mark and Leah stood hand in hand, gazing out at the blue marble of Earth below, the full weight of their journey hit him. From that first encounter in Oakville to this moment, suspended above the planet, they had crossed barriers of biology, culture, and even space itself. So, Leah, she said softly, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears, what happens now? Mark turned to her, drinking in the sight of her luminescent skin, her flowing metallic hair. He thought of all they'd been through, all they'd overcome, and he knew with a certainty that went beyond mere biology or cosmic bonds exactly what he wanted now. He pulled her close. We build a bridge between our worlds, together, as their lips met in a kiss that seemed to ignite the very stars around them. Mark knew that their adventure was far from over, but whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new frontiers they would face them side by side. The bond between them pulsed stronger than ever, a testament to the power of love across the cosmos. And as Earth turned slowly below, Mark and Leah began to write the next chapter of their extraordinary story, a tale of two worlds united by a love that defied the very laws of nature. The shuttle touched down on the outskirts of Oakville with a gentle thud, kicking up a cloud of dust that shimmered in the early morning light. As the hatch opened with a hiss, Mark stepped out first, his hand extended to help Leah. Her luminescent skin pulsed with excitement as her feet touched Earth once more. Home. Home. Sweet home, Mark said, a grin spreading across his face. Leah's violet eyes swept across the familiar landscape, drinking in the sight of the small Midwestern town that had changed both their lives forever. It feels different somehow, she mused. Like everything's the same but new. Mark squeezed her hand. That's because we're different. We've changed. As they made their way into town, the streets still quiet in the pre-dawn hours, Mark couldn't help but marvel at how surreal it all felt. Just months ago, he'd been a small-town newspaper editor, and Leah had been the mysterious alien mail carrier who turned his world upside down. Now, after their harrowing adventure and the revelation of their cosmic bond, they were what exactly? The answer came as they rounded the corner onto Main Street. Mrs. Kaminsky, ever the early riser, was sweeping her front stoop. Her eyes widened as she caught sight of them, her broom clattering to the ground. Well, I'll be, she exclaimed, hurrying over, if it isn't our very own star-crossed lovers back from outer space. Mark chuckled, surprised by the warmth in the old woman's voice. Good morning, Mrs. K. It's good to be back. Mrs. Kaminsky's eyes twinkled as she looked between them. I suppose all that fuss about alien mind control was a bit overblown, E.H.? You two seem happy as clams. Leah's skin flushed a deeper blue, her version of a blush. We are very happy, Mrs. Kaminsky, and I want to apologize for any trouble I caused during my biological cycle. ... The old woman waved her hand dismissively. Water under the bridge, dear. Besides, it certainly livened things up around here.
Now you two must be exhausted. Why don't you come in for some coffee and tell me all about your adventures? As they followed Mrs. Kaminsky into her home, Mark felt a weight lift from his shoulders. If the town's biggest gossip was welcoming them with open arms, maybe their return wouldn't be as challenging as he'd feared. Over the next few weeks, Mark and Leah settled into a rhythm of domestic bliss that was at once wonderfully ordinary and utterly extraordinary. They moved into Mark's small house, transforming it into a home that bridged their two worlds. Leah's alien plants, with their swirling iridescent leaves, mingled with Mark's collection of classic Earth novels. The kitchen became a laboratory of culinary fusion, where Leah's exotic spices melded with Mark's Midwestern comfort food in ways that delighted and occasionally alarmed their taste buds. Their nights were filled with stargazing, Leah pointing out constellations from her homeworld, while Mark shared the myths behind Earth's celestial patterns. And when they made love, their bond pulsed with an energy that seemed to make the very air around them shimmer. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of cultural clash, of misunderstanding and frustration, like the time Leah accidentally shorted out the entire block's power grid during a particularly intense moment of passion, her bioluminescence overloading the electrical system. Or the day Mark came home to find Leah had redecorated the living room in the style of her homeworld, complete with furniture that hovered 2 feet off the ground. I thought it would make you feel more comfortable, Leah explained, her face falling as she saw Mark's shocked expression. Have I done something wrong? Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. No, it's not wrong. It's just a lot. Maybe we could find a middle ground, something that represents both our cultures? Leah's face lit up, quite literally, at the suggestion. Oh, like a cultural exchange within our own home. How fascinating. These moments of compromise and understanding became the foundation of their relationship, each challenge bringing them closer together. Their friends, too, played a crucial role in their new life. Tom, in particular, became a regular fixture in their home, his initial skepticism about their relationship evolving into wholehearted support. One evening, as they sat around the dining table enjoying a meal of Earth burgers topped with a sauce made from bioluminescent Andromeda fungi, Tom raised his beer in a toast. To the weirdest, most awesome couple I know, he declared. You guys make me believe anything's possible. Leah tilted her head, a habit she'd never quite shaken. But Tom, statistically speaking, interspecies relationships are still incredibly rare. We are very much an anomaly. Mark and Tom burst out laughing while Leah looked on in confusion. That's kind of the point, babe, Mark explained, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. We're breaking new ground here. Leah's skin pulsed with understanding and joy. Oh, a figure of speech. How delightful. In that case, I propose a toast of my own. She raised her glass of synthesized Andromeda nectar. To anomalies and the joy they bring to the universe? As they clinked glasses, Mark felt a surge of love and gratitude through their bond. This was what they'd fought for. The chance to build a life together, to show that love truly could transcend the barriers of species and space. The months flew by, each day bringing new discoveries and deeper understanding. Leah resumed her work as a mail carrier, her route now a vital link in the growing network of interstellar communication. Mark's role at the newspaper expanded to include coverage of alien affairs, his unique perspective making him the go-to source for all things extraterrestrial. Together, they became ambassadors of sorts, bridging the gap between human and alien communities. They hosted dinner parties, where Earth politicians rubbed elbows with visiting dignitaries from distant galaxies. They gave talks at schools, teaching children about the vast diversity of life in the universe and the importance of understanding and acceptance. And through it all, their love deepened, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. As their first anniversary approached, Mark knew he wanted to do something special, something that would honor both their cultures and the unique journey that had brought them together. He spent weeks planning in secret, coordinating with Tom, and even reaching out to Director Chen for assistance. When the day finally arrived, he blindfolded Leah and drove them out to a secluded field outside of town. Mark Henderson, Leah said, a mixture of excitement and trepidation in her voice. What are you up to? Mark grinned as he helped her from the car. You'll see. Or, well, you won't see quite yet. But trust me, it'll be worth it. He guided her across the field, the grass cool beneath their feet in the twilight.
When they reached the center, he positioned her carefully before removing the blindfold.
Leah gasped, her skin flaring with brilliant pulses of light. All around them, holographic projectors flickered to life, filling the air with a breathtaking display of stars and nebulae. But these weren't just any celestial bodies. Mark recognized constellations from Leah's homeworld mingling with familiar Earth patterns.
"Oh, Mark!"
Leah breathed, her eyes wide with wonder.
"It's beautiful! But how?"
Mark wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I had some help. Turns out Director Chen isn't all bad. She lent us some fancy alien tech for the night." As they stood there, surrounded by the glory of two galaxies, Mark felt a swell of emotion that was equal parts his own and Leah's flowing through their bond. "Leah," he said softly, turning her to face him, "this past year has been the most incredible journey of my life. You've shown me wonders I never dreamed existed, pushed me to be better than I ever thought I could be, and I want to keep exploring the universe with you for as long as we both shall live."
He dropped to one knee, pulling out a small box.
Inside nestled a ring unlike any on Earth, a band of swirling iridescent metal that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "Will you marry me?" Mark asked, his heart pounding. "Not just by Earth customs, but by the traditions of your world too. Will you be my partner across the cosmos?" Leah's skin blazed with joy, her emotions flooding their bond with such intensity that Mark felt tears spring to his eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice resonating with that otherworldly melody that had first captivated him. "1,000 times yes, in every language across the universe." As Mark slipped the ring onto her finger, the holographic stars around them erupted in a dazzling light show, as if the very fabric of space was celebrating their union. Their kiss was electric, quite literally. Small arcs of energy danced between them, their bond surging with a power that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Leah's eyes sparkled with mischief. "You know," she said, her voice low and sultry, "on my world, engagements are typically sealed with a very special ritual." Mark raised an eyebrow, a grin spreading across his face. "Oh, really? And what might that entail?" Leah's skin pulsed with a rhythm that sent shivers down Mark's spine. "Why don't I show you?" she purred, pulling him close. As they sank down onto the cool grass, the holographic universe swirling around them, Mark knew that their greatest adventure was just beginning. 5 years later, the nursery was bathed in a soft, pulsing glow that emanated not from any lamp, but from the tiny figure nestled in the crib. Mark stood in the doorway, watching in awe as his daughter's skin shimmered with gentle waves of blue and violet light. Leah appeared beside him, wrapping an arm around his waist. "She's dreaming of the stars again," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Mark nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from their miracle child. Luna Celeste Henderson was the first of her kind, a perfect blend of human and alien DNA, with Leah's luminescent skin and Mark's curious brown eyes. "Do you think she'll be able to control it?" Mark asked softly. "The glowing, I mean." Leah chuckled, a sound like tinkling wind chimes. "Eventually, though I suspect we're in for some interesting parent-teacher conferences when she starts school." As if on cue, Luna's eyes fluttered open. She gurgled happily at the sight of her parents, tiny starbursts of light dancing across her skin. "Hey there, Supernova," Mark cooed, reaching down to scoop her up. "Having adventures in your dreams?" Luna babbled in response, a mixture of human sounds and the melodic tones of Leah's native language. Their bond, once a connection between just the two of them, had expanded to encompass their daughter in a way that still left Mark in awe. As they stood there, a family bridging the gap between worlds, Mark reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The challenges they faced, the prejudices they'd overcome, the bureaucratic nightmares they'd navigated to make their marriage legal on both Earth and Leah's home world. But every struggle had been worth it. For this, for the feeling of his daughter in his arms, for the love that flowed between the three of them, defying the very laws of nature. "What are you thinking about?" Leah asked, sensing the flow of emotions through their bond. Mark smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just how lucky we are. How amazing our life is." Leah's skin pulsed with agreement. "It is rather extraordinary, isn't it? Though I must say, I'm looking forward to Luna's teenage years. I hear Human adolescence is quite the adventure."
Mark groaned good-naturedly. "Don't remind me. I'm not sure the universe is ready for a hormonal half-alien teenager with bioluminescent skin." They shared a laugh, soft and intimate in the glow of their daughter's nursery. As Luna drifted back to sleep in Mark's arms, her tiny hand curled around one of Leah's glowing fingers, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For theirs was a love that had crossed galaxies, defied biology, and created a new form of life. And in that love, in the family they had built, lay the promise of a future where the boundaries between worlds faded away, replaced by understanding, acceptance, and the infinite possibilities of the cosmos. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Mark and Leah stood watch over their sleeping daughter, guardians of a new era of interstellar harmony. And in the quiet of that moment, surrounded by the soft glow of their extraordinary love, they knew that their greatest adventures were still to come. Dear listeners, the story of Mark and Leah is not just a sci-fi tale about love between a human and an alien. It is a parable about the power of connection that can overcome the most incredible obstacles in a world where differences often divide us. Mark and Leah showed that love and understanding can flourish even between beings from different planets. Their journey reminds us that a true connection goes beyond physical closeness or biological attraction. It is rooted in a deep, unbreakable unity of souls. This story calls on us to be open to the unexpected, to embrace those who are different from us, and to have the courage to follow our hearts even when the path seems impossible. It reminds us that love is not just a feeling but a choice we make every day. Despite difficulties and uncertainty, let the story of Mark and Leah inspire you to seek connections that challenge conventions, to expand the boundaries of your understanding, and to believe in the power of love to overcome any barrier, whether cultural, biological, or even interstellar. Remember, in the vast cosmos of possibilities, each of us has the potential for extraordinary connection. We just need to open our hearts and minds to the unknown. May your own journey be as thrilling, transformative, and full of love as that of Mark and Leah. They use their claws and teeth mostly. No tentacles required. "Extraordinary!" Leah exclaimed. She took a step closer, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Humans are so different from my people in so many ways. For instance, your epidermis doesn't appear to be bioluminescent. How do you attract mates?" Mark nearly dropped the hose he was holding. "I what?" Livik Carresto. Leah gestured to her own glowing skin. "On my world, the brightness of one's bioluminescence is a key factor in attracting a potential mate. The brighter the glow, the more desirable the individual. But humans seem to rely on other factors. What are they?" Mark's mind raced. How had they gone from small talk about cats to discussing human mating habits? "It's complicated," he stammered. "There are lots of factors. Personality, shared interests, physical attraction." Leah nodded seriously. "I see. And what traits do you personally find attractive?" Quote, Mark Henderson, the directness of her question caught him off guard. I guess I like someone who's intelligent, funny, kind, and physically." Leah pressed, taking another step closer. She was now mere inches away, close enough that Mark could feel the subtle hum of energy emanating from her skin. Mark swallowed hard. That is. He was saved from his fumbling response by the sound of a car horn. Mrs. Kaminsky was driving by. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously at the scene before her. "Everything all right over there?" she called out. Mark's mind raced, searching for a way out. "Just fine, Mrs. K," he called back. "Leah here was just explaining some of her planet's customs." Mrs. Kaminsky's lips pursed. "I'm sure she was. Don't let me interrupt your cultural exchange." As she drove off, Mark turned back to Leah, mortified. "I'm so sorry about that. Small town, you know? People can be a bit judgmental." Leah tilted her head, curiosity evident in her expression. "Judgmental about what?" "We were merely conversing." Mark ran a hand through his hair, unsure how to explain. "It's complicated. Some people might think—" "Never mind.
It's not important. Leah studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I have much to learn about human interactions, it seems. Perhaps you could teach me? There was something in her tone, a hint of suggestion that made Mark's pulse quicken. Sure. I'm probably not the best teacher, but I could try.
Leah's smile widened. Excellent! We can start now.
I believe it's customary to invite new acquaintances for a beverage, is it not? Would you like to join me for a coffee after my route is finished? Mark blinked, taken aback by her forwardness. You mean like today? Unless you have prior engagements. Leah's face fell slightly, and Mark found himself rushing to reassure her.
No, today's fine. Great, actually.
I'd love to.
Wonderful!
Leah clapped her hands together, her skin pulsing with apparent excitement. I'll return at 1,700 hours. 5 p.m. Until then, Mark Henderson. As she continued on her route, Mark stood rooted to the spot, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. The rest of the day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Mark tried to distract himself with work, but found himself constantly checking the clock.
By 4:30, he was a bundle of nerves, pacing his living room.
What if this was a huge mistake? What if they had nothing to talk about? What if he made a fool of himself? A knock at the door jolted him from his spiraling thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Mark opened it to find Leah standing there, somehow even more stunning than before. She had changed out of her postal uniform into a shimmering dress that seemed to ripple with her every movement.
Hello, Mark Henderson, she said, her smile radiant.
Are you ready for our outing? Mark nodded, not trusting himself to speak, as they walked down the street toward the local coffee shop. He was acutely aware of the stares and whispers following them. Leah, however, seemed oblivious, chattering away about her day. And then Mr. Johansson asked if I could deliver a package to his wife on Venus, she laughed. I had to explain that, despite being an extraterrestrial, I'm not actually familiar with every planet in the galaxy. Mark chuckled, some of his tension easing. Yeah, Earl's not the sharpest tool in the shed, but he means well. They reached the coffee shop, a cozy little place called the Daily Grind. As they entered, conversation ground to a halt. Every eye in the place turned to them. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly.
So, what would you like to drink?
Leah studied the menu board intently. I'm not familiar with most of these beverages. What would you recommend? How about a latte? Mark suggested. It's coffee with steamed milk. Nice and smooth. That sounds lovely. Leah nodded. I'll have one of those, please. As Mark placed their order, he could hear the whispers starting up again behind him. He gritted his teeth, determined not to let it ruin their time. Was this a date? He wasn't even sure. They found a table in the corner, somewhat sheltered from the prying eyes of the other patrons. As they sat, Leah leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. So, Mark Henderson, she began. Tell me about yourself. What do you do when you're not collecting mail from attractive alien visitors? Quote. Mark nearly choked on his coffee. I work for the local paper. Nothing too exciting. Just copy editing, mostly. Leah's eyes widened. But that sounds fascinating. You must know all the local news before anyone else. Tell me, what's the most intriguing story you've worked on recently? As Mark launched into a tale about the great Oakville Cheese Fest debacle of last year, he found himself relaxing. Leah was an attentive listener, asking insightful questions and laughing at all the right moments. Before he knew it, an hour had passed. Oh my, Leah said, glancing at the ornate watch on her wrist. I've taken up so much of your time. I hope I haven't been a bother. Not at all, Mark assured her quickly. This has been really nice, actually. Leah beamed at him, her skin pulsing with a warm glow. I'm so glad you think so. I've greatly enjoyed our time together. As they stood to leave, Leah suddenly swayed on her feet. Mark reached out to steady her, his hand on her waist. Are you okay? He asked, concern evident in his voice. Leah blinked rapidly, her usually bright eyes slightly unfocused. I'm not sure. I feel rather strange. Perhaps your earth beverages don't agree with my physiology. Mark cursed himself for not considering that possibility. I'm so sorry. I should have thought of that. Here, let me walk you home. Quote, dot. As they made their way down the darkening street, Leah leaned heavily against Mark. He could feel the coolness of her skin through her dress, and a faint humming sensation that seemed to emanate from her very being. "Mark," she murmured, her voice slightly slurred. "You're so very kind and quite aesthetically pleasing for a human."
Mark felt his face heat up.
Thanks. You're pretty aesthetically pleasing yourself." Leah giggled. The sound like tinkling bells. "Oh, I know, but it's nice to hear you say it." They reached the small apartment building where Leah was staying. As they climbed the steps, she turned to face him, swaying slightly. "I had a wonderful time tonight, Mark Henderson," she said, her violet eyes boring into his. "Perhaps we could do this again sometime?" Before Mark could respond, Leah leaned in and pressed her lips to his cheek. It wasn't quite a kiss, more like a buzz of electricity against his skin, but it left him stunned nonetheless. "Good night," Leah whispered, disappearing into her apartment.
Mark stood there for a long moment, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been. Finally he turned and began the walk home,